today on global consumer trends and how companies can leverage them. I'm Denise Darloff, Senior Researcher here at the Conference Board, focused on consumer research. We have a full agenda today talking about the world of consumers. This is a very dynamic world. There's a lot happening every day in terms of technology, changing competitive environment, changing consumer behavior, and we're here today to talk with our expert panel about some of these changes going on. So let me introduce the agenda to you. So we're covered today two global consumer studies. One is by the Conference Board in collaboration with Nielsen. The other one is by PwC, which is an annual global consumer insight study. And we'll go sort of from a macro perspective on consumers, how they feel economically, their spending intentions, their concerns. And then we move to more of a micro behavior, how consumers use new technologies like voice technology, how they use their mobile phones for shopping, what they think about tech companies getting into healthcare. And so let me introduce our expert panel on this webcast today. Let me start with Sumer Sayani, who's joining us remotely from Toronto. Sumer is a vice president with Nielsen. He's also a co-leader here at the Conference Board of our Consumer Dynamics Institute. And at Nielsen, he has held various positions on different continents, ranging from Europe to the Middle East and Africa to the US and now in Canada. And so he knows, he has experience in many regions of the world. And here in studio, I'm joined by Matt Eagle from PwC. He's a partner with PwC and is the chief strategy officer for the digital practice. Matt is working with a lot of retail clients and other businesses working with consumers, such as in healthcare, financial services, and also media. And last but not least, we have John Forsyth. John is also a co-leader of our Consumer Dynamics Institute here at the Conference Board. He was a longtime partner at McKinsey, where he's a true expert actually in consumer insights. He founded the marketing insights and analytics practice at McKinsey and led it for many years. He has also worked with a range of clients in various industries, and we are thrilled to have you all here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So to kick it off, actually some housekeeping items before we start our conversations. So for this webcast, you can actually get professional credit. You just have to give us your name, your email address, and then respond to the prompts that you get throughout the webcast. And I should also say we want to keep this very interactive. We have a couple of poll questions in this webcast. But in addition, we encourage you to ask questions. There is space on your screens where you can send us questions, and we'll weave them into the conversation as we get them. So to kick it off, let me ask our expert panel, if you could, in a minute or so, give like your view of the consumer world at this moment in time. What do you see as the biggest opportunities or challenges? How would you summarize that? Let's start off with you, Matt.
Thanks, Denise. I think it's a really exciting time because there's so much globalization around some of the trends and some of the opportunities that we're seeing, not just with the companies pursuing more global businesses, but also the way consumers are engaging. And we also see a significant shift from products to experiences. And that actually allows for spreading of new trends and behaviors more rapidly because of the focus on experience. I think that's what I would highlight is the importance of experience and much more of a global and faster moving shifts in some of the trends and behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. John, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Denise. Let me that's with a macro and a micro thought, right? And the macro, not to take too much steam out of what you're about to do, but in confidence, while it's a little off the peak, we're seeing these at very, very high levels in many parts of the world. And it is, I agree with you, Matt, it's an amazing time, right? So, because of that, in the short run in 2019, consumer trends look very nice. How long that will last, I'm sure we'll get into that in the discussion. But, right now in most of the parts of the world, it's a great macro, economic view, at least in consumer confidence.
Mm-hmm.
On the micro side, I'd also like to build, Matt, on what you said, because I think looking at the commonalities on consumers across countries, I think is very, very interesting. We're trained as marketers to look at differences, right? We look at, here's our target segment, here's our target demographic, how are we going to get at that? And that's all important. We should still do that, right? We're going to look at differences in regions and differences in countries, and you should still look at that. But look at the commonalities as well. In a lot of the work that I've done, people's needs, we've seen the same thing. Their needs are similar across country. If their affordability is about the same, their behavior starts to look the same. And I think it comes out clearly in this fantastic research you're going to share with us. And Samir, I point to Samir, right? In the work you did years ago, in the Demand Institute, it's all there. So I agree with you. Don't forget about the differences, but look at the commonalities too.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Samir, what are your thoughts?
I think I completely agree with Matt and John, and I would just say, in my view, I think the power is significantly shifting in consumers' favor in the digital age, and I think that's a good thing. I think this constant connectivity and explosion of experiential applications is impacting consumer lifestyle and behavior in a number of exciting ways. They want the same kind of seamless, convenient, custom, and agile experiences across both the online and offline world. And I think it's interesting how we're going to see organizations, consumer-facing businesses, connecting these two worlds. I think what we're also seeing is a lot of these consumers are beginning to express and live their values and showcasing what they believe in through their wallets. And so again, agile, fast way of understanding, measuring this behavior shifts or their innate human truths. I think that's going to be also very interesting endeavor for consumer-facing businesses. At a macro level, as John said, I think if you look across, if you look at the global CCI survey results, there is tendency to be, there's a lot of positivism around the world. Consumers tend to are feeling good about their prospects, and then we are seeing those, result in actual retail sales and other benchmarks. So I think, as we see these, more and more consumers joining the global economy, getting connected, willing to express themselves, I think, future is pretty bright for consumer-facing businesses, provided that, they're able to build trusted and, valuable measurements to understand those shifts.
Great. Well, this was a range of, things to pay attention to or, things that are going on. So obviously, it's a complex world for consumer goods companies. And we'll touch on some of these aspects in today's webcast. So let's kick it off with the more macro picture. We already heard, you mentioning consumer confidence. So the Conference Board, in collaboration with Nielsen, has a new global study out that we do every quarter. It's an online survey with 32,000 consumers around the world. These are online consumers that respond to the survey, and we ask to determine consumer confidence in those 64 countries. We ask 3 questions. They are about their views on job prospects, their personal financial situation, and their spending intentions. The question we ask is very simple. We just ask, how do you feel about these 3 things? And there are 4 categories how they can answer. They can say excellent, good, not so good, or bad. And based on these responses, we calculate an index per country and then also per region and for the world. We'll get more into spending intentions in a little bit, but let's first show you the latest picture that we got from our Q1 2019 survey. So when you look at the left side of the slide, you see like this heat map, and the more reddish orangey regions, they are high in consumer confidence, which, by the way, we define any value over 100 is positive, means consumers are optimistic. So we see here, and the bluish areas are, those regions with lower optimism. So we see here that North America is pretty red, as is Asia Pacific. When you move to the end, and Europe tends to be on the bluer side, meaning less optimistic, as well as parts of Latin America. When you look to the right part of the slide, you see the changes from the previous quarter. And so there, the green areas mean the improvements, and the reddish areas mean like drops in consumer confidence. So overall, the picture that we have seen is, again, like North America, Asia Pacific is pretty bullish, very positive. The rest of the world is a little bit more, like in a pessimistic area. We see some of the large economies, stalling, like the US and Germany. Japan has dropped. On the other hand, we see emerging economies like China has improved. Some of the Latin America countries have also improved. And then overall, looking at the trend over time, as Sumer and John already hinted at, consumer confidence is very high. We see generally a rising trend over time. We see it's very high levels. We see some stalling in North America. Asia Pacific hasn't risen recently, but generally has been on an uptrend. The question is, like, what do companies do with this data? How can they leverage it for their benefit? And let me ask you first, John. What is your reaction to this picture, and how can companies leverage this?
Yeah, there are three things quickly in terms of what I would do if I were back in a company as I started out at Nestle. And one is, as Lee said, we have data on 64 countries. And so you look at your portfolio of countries that you're in, and you can look at this data and say, okay, where are there countries where there's great opportunity? I should be investing for growth because the conditions are right there. And on the other end of the spectrum, where are countries where it's going to be a little more challenging in the short run, and start to think about, okay, what actions should I do to make sure we can hold on to what we have, and just kind of get through the tougher times. So one is just to look at it as a portfolio of countries and link that into your portfolio of opportunities. Second is we're going to show you regional data like on this page, and that's because it is a bit mind-boggling to look at 64 countries. However, I would really strongly urge to look beneath what's going on in these regions. If I go back to this page, if you look at Asia, yes, India and China are burning up, on the left-hand side of the page, with very high numbers. Japan's at 83, and South Korea is at 49. So within a very small part of Asia, you've got some very high numbers and some very low numbers. So really go beneath this, because the country data, I think, is very rich. And the third thing, though, is, if I had to weight the two, I would spend probably more time thinking about the trends. Some of the countries, we know their cultural biases in answering some of these questions. India is always high. South Korea has always been low for us. And so, you're going to see some differences due to cultures. So I would look at the trends. So for example, I don't know if you can see Scandinavia in there, but Norway and Finland are in the blue. They have indices under 100, but they're green. They're actually growing. Their confidence is growing really fast. Well, I look at that and say, wow, there could be some very interesting opportunities in Norway and Finland. Portugal looks the same way. So three quick things to take a look at to use the data.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Sumer, what's your take on this? You have lived and worked in various parts of the world, various of these regions. And, also from your work now, is this in line with how companies feel about these regions? What are the opportunities for them?
I think I will go with where, what John was talking about, variances in scores across different countries and different markets. And I think we should always keep in mind the aspect of cultural differences when reading these numbers. And I think companies who have worked in these markets for a number of years, they understand that there needs to be that additional framework that needs to be put in. But going back, I think taking an overall view, I think this is a great first lens for consumer-facing businesses to identify opportunities. And I think we have learned, and John talked about there being trended data available, and what we have seen is that consumers tend to be pretty apt in assessing the economic climate and then responding, by tuning the way they spend their spare cash. But all categories and all products are not created equal. Some are more resilient to, I think, small changes in consumer sentiments, while others show a higher degree of variability with even a small change. So I think businesses need to kind of, analyze and build this, rigor in the analysis as to, where their products and services stack up in this kind of variability and across which markets. Just to give you an example, U.S. has had amazing record-breaking high confidence levels in the recent past. But then when you drill down into how consumers are responding to these high confidence levels, especially in the CPG world, if I could, we see two trends. First is that overall U.S. consumers made 0.3% more trips to retail stores in 2018 versus 2017, so that's a positive. But then interestingly, where they went most, happens to be dollar stores and mass merchandise stores, which saw the most increase. At the same time, the private labels or the store brands are growing at much faster rate than name brands, and which then kind of connects nicely to the fact that with the rising confidence levels, they tend to be their sensitivity around pricing and premiumization is kind of fading away. So I think to John's point, I think this is a great place to start, but there needs to be, I think businesses need to go a little bit more deeper and connected to their core business and understand how those variations impact their categories.
Matt.
Just one thing to build on, Samir, is I think you made a point about getting into the nuance one level deeper within countries. I think cyclically too, we've seen this in the past, with past consumer insight studies that we've done, that certain sectors actually can have trends that are against the grain. So for example, in periods with less confidence, you may see more eating at home as opposed to eating out. So people's behavior may shift a little bit. And the inverse when things tend to get more positive. So that actually creates an opportunity either in terms of the specific channels or some specific products that may actually have wind in their sails in periods that are blue here, or conversely, that there's an opportunity to really differentiate the experience and invest in certain markets when it's more positive. So the answer is a little bit has to be put in context of what market you're in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that. I mean, some of the data we're not going to show today is that when they say, what do I cut back first? Meals out and takeaway is way up there. So we've seen exactly that.
Yeah, and there's a general long wave trend towards more experience over product, but the products you consume shift and the types of experiences you consume shift too.
So it seems like it's a really good input then for marketing strategy, or at least a kickoff to look more deeply into certain categories and what's going on, what are the opportunities. Okay, let's switch now, or let's a little bit look at one of the components that I mentioned earlier. In consumer confidence, one of the aspects we are asking about is spending intentions. How do people feel about is it a good time to spend right now? And this is what we have been seeing over time. We have seen that the spending sentiment is up in Asia Pacific and Latin America. However, it's trending down a little bit lately in North America and Europe. So what is your take on that, Matt? Like also thinking about, this is a consumer perspective. This is, how consumers recall information or how they plan to spend their money. What is your take on that? How can companies interpret this kind of data about spending intentions?
Well, I think spending intentions are directional. It's a good sense of people's attitudes and how open-minded they are. I think there's always an opportunity to market and drive spending if you have a great value proposition, but it gives you a sense of openness on what people's frame of mind is, and potentially the messaging and the way to think about, where there's more receptivity. But I think it's mainly directional for something like this. What would you think, John or Samir?
Samir, just to tag on to that, since we have the regional breakout here, is there anything that jumps out to you? Also thinking, about what you see at Nielsen in terms of consumer spending in different regions. And maybe you can also give us some insight on, the Asian market obviously is very big. Are there any hot markets, any comments on specific markets?
Yeah, let me take the Asia Pac one first, because that's such a fascinating region, and I want to pick that up first because there is recently some work that was done by Nielsen to really understand what's happening. And I think what we see in Asia Pac is that it continues to boast some of the highest levels of GDP growth. The world's most optimistic consumers on an increasing year over year. And if I talk about FMCG, then it has been a lot of markets are seeing some solid FMCG growth as well. Across many of these markets, I think average income levels have been growing by double digits. And so I think more and more consumers are feeling that their financial situation has improved in Asia more than any other region. In fact, if you look at the top 10 countries which where they're expressing confidence in spending and their personal situation, 6 of them are in Asia. China, Indonesia, Vietnam, India, Philippines. I think the kind of some of the ones that show up. So, but I think the real story in Asia, like in some other parts of the world, lies in understanding market at a little bit of a subnational level. And John referenced to this work that we did, with the Demand Institute together with Conference Board and Nielsen in China, for example. We identified tier 2 and 3 markets, and we challenged the consumer-facing businesses to look at growth in those markets first, in a number of different categories. Another work that was done recently by Nielsen in Southeast Asian markets, it busted quite a few myths about Asia. For example, we saw that Philippines accounted for 25% of demand in the top 50 markets across 8 product categories, very specific product categories. Growth rates we saw could be 7 times larger for some regions within countries than the national average. And another big myth that we busted was that mega cities represent the largest consumer market share. So I think as we talk about Asia, obviously we cannot ignore India and China, as Matt said, as John also pointed towards, that they're burning hot. Young population getting connected more and more. But then there are markets like Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, and Philippines that are, I think, interesting to watch out. And then, like we saw in the global picture, I think the more mature markets like Australia, Japan, and South Korea, you could say that their scores are low, so there is no opportunity. But I think, again, if you look at some specific sectors, as Matt also said, I think you will identify some interesting trends there, especially in sectors like healthcare, holidays and vacation in some of these markets.
We are seeing a lot of investment in the markets outside BRIC, right? So and if you look at like digital and e-commerce, there's actually quite a huge uptick in interest in investing in markets in that second tier, like Samir said. So I think initially there was a lot of focus on the really big markets because there's just so much potential and so many people moving into the middle class. And now there's a lot of interest in moving into the next tier, and we're starting to see when people pick countries to launch pilot projects and invest, that they're giving a much stronger look to some of these second tier markets now.
Interesting. So good to have information on so many countries, including the second tier. We actually got an audience question, and maybe I can connect that, handing it over to you, John. There's a question: can you explain or speak to the dramatic spikes up and down in the US? I mean, we have seen recently, as the slide shows, we have seen some, softening in North America, which includes Canada. But do you have any thoughts on the region, US in general, the maybe little instability in the US?
Yeah, a couple thoughts the North American number you see there, and obviously the U.S. Because it's probably, if you look at that, it's more than a blip, right? It's now that we've seen this coming down, it's starting to look like a trend. However, the number's still really high, right? That's the purple number on the chart, and it's up there with Asia Pacific, so it's still really high. So that's why I think in the short term we're reasonably bullish on consumer spending for this year. Now that's all contingent on job creations. By the way, to build on what Samir had to say, a lot of the jobs that are being created are blue collar workers, which we haven't seen for a long time, right? So that's very interesting. But it's interesting, we'll see what happens. I mean, the things that are risks here, right, are trade wars, right, and tariffs, and that could slow this down, as well as what the Fed does in response. We believe they'll keep interest rates the same, but if they do that, if they take them up, that'll affect it. Of course, I guess we read yesterday they could take them down if there's a tariff. So I don't know. 2020 should be interesting to look at.
Right. All right, let's move on to our next topic. And that involves an audience question. So let me set this up. Our quarterly global survey also asked consumers what kinds of categories they spend money on after they have covered all their necessities. And so we have a poll question for the audience, and we would really encourage you to participate. The poll question is, compared to the previous quarter, meaning the last quarter of 2018, have plans to buy new clothes, how have they developed in Q1 of this year? And the answer categories are: in most regions, more consumers plan to buy new clothes, or is it fewer consumers, or is it a very mixed picture across the world? And while this poll is going on, we'll actually look at how spending intentions for new technology have evolved. We see here that Asia Pacific has the highest graph. Is the poll on, just to make sure? Okay, great. No, I can't. Okay, that's the clear winner. So maybe we'll start with that. So very mixed result. Let me actually show the spending on new clothes now. So we see here that, in fact, the development has been mostly one that moves actually downward. In Asia Pacific, we see a drop. In Europe, Latin America, the only region where we see a slight uptick is actually North America. So what's your take on that, Matt? Do you have any thoughts on what's going on in the clothing sector, and what can companies do with this kind of information? Is it all pessimistic?
Well, I think we saw outside North America and the trend. I believe there was some softening of anticipated spending, and that's maybe seen as more of a discretionary purchase for some people. So perhaps they're waiting, or think they might be more cautious.
Yeah, actually, I think that's right. I didn't want to say it before because I knew the poll was coming up. But in addition to meals out and takeaway, particularly in the U.S. and in many countries in Europe, apparel is one of the first things that people start to cut back on. So we start to watch that pretty carefully too.
You can segment apparel into your basics and then your more discretionary purchases, and the majority of the spending is outside the basics. So.
Actually, buying new clothes has long been a leading indicator for where the economy is headed, because, as you're saying, it's discretionary spending. So if you don't really need to buy new clothes, consumers are cutting back. So, Mayor, do you have any thoughts on the developments for plans to buy new clothes and our poll? I can't hear you anymore. Sure. All right. So, okay. So, in the interest of time, let's move on to our more detailed portion of the. We had some other more of the macro issues. We have questions in our quarterly survey about consumers' concerns, and they range from political ones to economic ones to personal ones. And it's really interesting to see some of the trends over time. For example, global warming, as you see on this chart, has actually become a bigger top concern in some regions of the world. So you see a clear uptick recently in North America, Europe as well, Latin America. So this kind of information, gives you like a bigger picture of how consumers are feeling, what their pain points are, what's on their minds. Same here with work-life balance. You see in some regions it has gone up, like in Asia Pacific, in Africa and Middle East, as well as overall globally. So we have actually never shared this information, but we plan on making this accessible going forward. And some more of the regional differences. Every region has its idiosyncrasies in terms of top concerns. Like in North America, we have seen immigration has become a much bigger issue for people on their minds. In Asia Pacific, we see work-life balance is actually among the top 3. And again, every region has its idiosyncrasies. All right, so let's move on to more of the consumer behavior trends that the PwC study has found. And Matt will actually give us a little overview of the study and some of the findings.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to share some of the top-line findings. This is the 10th year that we've been doing the Global Consumer Insights Study. And this is a study that we've been doing in 30 countries. And you can see it's about just over 21,000 people that participated in the most recent study. And then just in terms of a few highlights from the study, and I believe we'll be sharing the full report available afterwards as well for people who want to see more than is shared in here. So a few points I wanted to call out really that we hit on in some of the earlier conversation. This is actually the first year that mobile commerce actually passed desktop. So when people talk about more engagement with mobile, this is really taking hold very, very rapidly. So I often like to say mobile is the glue that connects the physical and the digital world. And when you think about building out experiences, taking a mobile-first design makes a lot of sense. And here, what you can see is if you think about an experience economy, you got to have a strategy for mobile. And particularly in a world that's seeing a lot of globalization of these trends, some markets are leapfrogging faster to mobile. And that actually makes some of these trends spread faster because of the adoption of mobile in markets that are developing. The second trend is actually voice is gaining adoption very quickly. So think of Alexa or Siri or things like that. We're seeing self-reported nearly 1 in 10 people engaging in this technology. So this is faster than wearables. It's certainly faster than mobile adoption was. So that you can think of voice as the new search is the way it's emerging. So mobile is still much more important than voice, but voice is emerging very rapidly, and this is not just a US phenomena. A third point is that we're seeing, Samir talked about this earlier, behaviors that are learned in one part of the economy are being adopted in other parts of the economy. So things that are adopted in, say, consumer or in technology and entertainment are showing up in healthcare and financial services. So just like people are learning to use mobile apps in one part of the market, they're now expecting those experiences and engaging in those experiences more readily in markets like healthcare, where you might have expected more reticence about things that require sharing of data or more of a personal interaction with people for healthcare. And it's spreading globally very fast. So these are 4 trends.
Yeah, so just to pick up on that, you mentioned your high, and this slide actually shows it, like the increase in mobile use and how it has, eclipsed other digital channels. Sumer, thinking, it's a different channel. It's we have a mobile in our pockets 24/7. It obviously increases, our opportunity to shop. Have you seen any changes in what people are buying and how much they buy through the cell phone?
I think there is a number of different ways to look at m-commerce or mobile commerce. And one obviously is it being a purchase platform where you can actually consumers can procure products and services. But I think if equally importantly, I think it also provides a great way for companies to connect and engage with their consumers. And I think we need to talk about a little bit of that. Now, coming and talking specifically about m-commerce, I think Matt said very clearly that mobile commerce is taking over desktop and tablets, by Q1 2019. But I think still the conversion rate when compared to desktop and laptop and tablets, as well as the average order size, is still smaller on a mobile platform as compared to the other means. The other challenge is that while there is infinite distribution on this platform, there is no infinite shelf. So, for example, if you look at you can have 230 SKUs of cereal on a brick and mortar grocery, while you can only get about 20 items listed on one page of Amazon on a mobile device, right? And we know that 70% of consumers do not go beyond page 1, and there is a 50% volume loss going from page 1 to 2 if you end up being on page 2. So I think it's a lot of nuances when you think about mobile as a platform simply from a commerce perspective. But I think what is also happening and what is changing this phenomenon a little bit is, again, using mobile as a platform to adding on to the experience side of things. And I'm talking specifically about AR or augmented reality, which I think is revolutionizing brand positioning as well as impacting the path to purchase. And it's allowing companies or brands or products to be positioned on the mobile platform that have never been able to do much online from an online sales perspective or online activity perspective. And that is, for example, car makers using this AR and VR kind of technology, using the mobile as a platform. So I think definitely there is it's growing. The average size is still smaller. The conversion rate is still lower than other forms. So there's an opportunity there. But at the same time, it's a great way to engage with consumers and get a share of their digital life, which I think is going to be significantly important.
It sounds like what you're highlighting is like the cell phone as sort of a part of the shopping journey to use like certain features or, to use it for information, maybe not necessarily to transact, but as a very important and powerful additional device. John, you were going to chime in.
Well, I was going to add the state is fantastic. I mean, there's two things occur to me here. One is the retail numbers are up, right? And so the retail's demise, isn't here yet, right? It's coming. I was just remembering our CEO and the conference board on a webcast on the future of retail said, well, if you're going to buy gasoline, you still got to go to a gas station, right? So retail bricks and mortar going away, isn't just in the cards, right?
I agree, and this year's study is actually titled, they have titles Return on Experience, and what the reason for that is that you need to think holistically, like we're just talking about the store, the website, mobile, and you're curating an experience, and you're competing not just with products but experiences. And if you deliver a good experience as a retail business, it's actually not just the physical store, it's the digital experience too. But you can drive more trips. You can be healthy even with all this change and all the shifts that are going on. There are retail businesses that are successful in driving more trips and more engagement. And obviously there are some that are up or some that are down. but companies that focus on that experience actually can find growth and opportunity to thrive in this world.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
And I would just say I agree 100% that mobile is not just transactions, that we really need to think of this as engagement and designing the experience, and that a lot of people will engage in mobile as a front end to a physical purchase, or they'll use mobile in a physical store.
John?
Yeah, so I mean, that's what was, I mean, it's what people talk about, omni-channel really is really true, right? It's not the retail, in-store versus other, right? It's like you say, the whole experience. Because, I mean, your numbers are up for in-store, they're up for PC, they're up for tablet, they're up for mobile, they're up for everything, right? Mm-hmm. So that, again, just goes to show that old myth of it's either or, it's just wrong, mm-hmm. right? And it is good to get that experience right.
So according to this slide, we don't have a crisis in retail, as you already said earlier, John. Everything seems like there is more interaction with these different devices. All right, so let's move on to one topic that Matt already mentioned earlier, voice commerce. This slide shows that almost 1 in 10 consumers now shop daily or weekly using a smart voice assistant. And that means actually transacting, not just using it, to get information. So we have actually another poll for you. We all know, and we have just talked about how the mobile phone has changed the world of retail and consumers. What is your opinion? How will voice assistants impact the world of shopping? Will they have a bigger effect, about an equal effect, or a smaller impact? So while we're waiting for the okay, there it is. Okay, now we see it. Okay, so while we're waiting for the results, let me ask our panelists: have you used the voice assistants to shop?
Yes.
And how was the experience? You mentioned experience earlier.
Well, I think people have different it was good, but I think you have to train yourself to kind of, like when you search, you have a certain way of learning how many words to use and how to narrow the results you get. I think people maybe when they have conversations don't necessarily have the same approach, and maybe need to learn to limit their searches a little more. But I think it's very comparable to using mobile and search, and it's just about learning how to interact with the device and get the limited focused results you want.
Sounds like there's a lot of learning involved. In the meantime, we have our results. So we have almost 49% think it's it will have a bigger impact, about 31% about equal, and 20% smaller. So we seem to have, an audience that believes in great impact. Samir, what are your reactions to voice assistants and to these results? Is that what you expected, or what you are expecting, like a bigger impact?
I think it's in line with what I expected and what Nielsen is also working on. So, integrating, for example, with Google Home is something that Nielsen has been working on, and it's beta testing right now, because I think it ticks a lot of boxes for consumers, right? It's around their preference for simplicity in their life, convenience. I think it's kind of also removes a lot of resistance in the path to purchase. But I think in my view, at least in the very short term, and it's hard to put a timeline in the world of technology these days because things are changing so fast. But I think in the very near term, I would like to see more end-to-end integration between third-party platforms and systems before I think the consumers are able to move with a whole lot more confidence and convert that from an informational to a more transactional kind of relationship. So I do believe that it's going to have a big impact, but not so in the very, very near term future.
So one thing I would encourage our listeners to think about is that there's an opportunity both to differentiate and drive better engagement. One, to be found, right? So with mobile and with voice, to be found, but to drive better engagement. And there's also an opportunity to remove cost and friction. So one of the opportunities with mobile and with voice, with both of them, is actually to make it easier with self-service, and you can actually take cost and friction out of the transaction, both in terms of finding the store, interacting in the store, purchasing certainly. So that creates an opportunity to remove cost and friction, both from a consumer standpoint and also a B2B. So you can think of it as like the numerator of your return on experience of how do I grow the numerator through differentiation, but also how do I lower the cost, which is lowering the denominator of your return on experience. And you can use these technologies like we were talking about, mobile, voice, augmented reality, virtual reality, for both growth and cost.
So it sounds like efficiency and also convenience, like to be quick and fast to get what you want. You don't have to wait. You can interact with a machine rather than being in a waiting line.
Yeah, and also the employee side of the equation. So one retailer is using voice to enable the employees to interact with all the company systems, and therefore you don't need to call in. You don't have to interact with as many different systems. Others are using virtual reality to enhance training programs to speed the rollout and the cost of them. So there's both a revenue and a cost side to this equation.
Mm-hmm. John, do you have any thoughts on what kinds of categories might be most suitable, as also for shopping to actually transact? Because ultimately, that might be another convenience potentially and cost savings. Any thoughts on that?
Well, to build on, actually, I think of what Samir said in Path to Purchase, or the consumer decision journey, you've got categories that have heavily searched, right, and are very intensive in terms of figuring out different options to buy. You've got other categories that are more almost programmatic, if I can use that word. It's probably a bad word to use, right? You keep buying the same thing over and over again until they're shifting, right? And it can impact both of those, right? I mean, a lot of folks that aren't in the search categories are worried that if they can get into, your system as the, drink to buy, then you're fine, right? Because you'll get bought over and over again. But if you don't get into the system, then you're not going to get the purchase. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, as Matt was saying, the way you're going to do search you could totally change, right? And again, you're probably not going to just use Alexa to do search, but it's how it's combined with those other things again to get the right experience and to lower the friction to get to what you need to know and make a decision.
Yeah, search is very different. When Sumira mentioned earlier, nobody scrolls to the second page of a mobile screen. In voice, it's almost like the winner takes it all. You have to be number one, otherwise, the voice assistant won't mention you.
It actually speeds up that habit building process. Like we talk about, once it's habitual, and if you take like beauty as an example, there's habitual purchases, and replenishment is a very, very large portion of sales in beauty, personal care, things like that. But once it's habitual, you want to win that and drive some shifts. But once it's habitual, that's a very short loop, right, to get people to purchase again. Mm.
And I think it also connects to one of the things that we saw in again one of our studies, which is building this relationship, trusted relationship between consumer and the brand, where consumers are willing to let go of some of their concerns around privacy and their personal information, thus allowing in AI-driven like Alexa or Google Home to actually help them search and order things that are important to them, that matter to them. So I think, there needs to be that, I think this aspect of relationship and trust between the brand and the consumer would play a big role in success of voice technologies in the future as well. Because, just to give you the example that we are building with Google, it's like, you want to make a pasta and you basically ask, Google, I want to make a pasta, and then Google Home tells you where can you find the ingredients and which ones are healthier. If the person is suffering from diabetes or what have you, then they will tell you which specific categories would work for them. So I think it's a lot about sharing a lot of information, and consumers want to do that where they believe there is trust and they get a fair return on that that exchange.
So it's a trade-off between privacy and getting a great experience and efficiency. All right, let's move on to another topic that the PwC study covered, which is tech companies getting into healthcare. The healthcare business is a very important one, and obviously consumers are, interacting with healthcare providers and health insurance and other companies in the system a lot. And in the US, for example, it's the healthcare sector makes up about 20% of the economy. And so the PwC study actually had a really interesting question responding to this trend that tech companies have gotten into healthcare. Anybody from, Apple and Google and Facebook and Amazon, everybody in their own way. And the survey asked consumers how they feel about these companies providing certain kinds of services, and not just to compile, health records in one place, but even, for diagnostic services or for doctor's visits even. And maybe let me ask you first, Matt, were there any findings that jumped out at you?
Well, I think first, I was not that surprised that people were adopting healthcare or financial services apps, because that's a trend we've been seeing for a while. What was actually a little surprising was the extent of the trust for some of the technology companies, given a lot of the press over the last year, that how strong this is. So there's a lot of, the way I would interpret this is consumers have learned behaviors. In healthcare is actually one market where a lot of the new entrants have been setting the bar. And I don't just mean like the ones that are shown here in the question, but there are a lot of new, smaller companies that are actually innovating and driving new experiences in healthcare, some of which are being in insurance, which are getting acquired by some of the larger companies too. So the consumers are actually looking for innovation, they're looking for new experiences, and they're used to getting that from tech companies. In fact, we did a study of brand leadership a couple years ago, and the companies that were viewed as brand leaders 15 years ago, that are like, the list has changed a lot. The companies that are viewed as brand leaders today, and a lot of what drives brand leadership is a combination of technology and values. So, if the tech companies are able to reinforce both the innovation and the values, they could do very well in this shift.
So might it be though that, technology is really like companies that cater to customer needs and are providing a better experience, like a faster one, you find better information, you get reviews and all of that.
Yeah.
Is that synonymous with customer experience, essentially?
Yeah, it's a big part of it. I do think Samir hit on the rocks in the water, though, to watch out for around trust. So if you think of water in the bathtub, if you discolor the water, it takes a while to replace the color. Right? So I think that trust is precious. It's a really strong asset, and companies need to be very careful about the risks here too. There's enormous opportunity, but the water could discolor very rapidly if trust is violated.
What do you think about that, Sumer, since you previously talked about trust? Would consumers trust these big tech companies, especially considering all the press that has been going around and all the discussions going on about these companies using data and privacy, and some things are intransparent? What do you think about that? Tech and healthcare.
I think it's certainly the recent press has had an impact. But at the same time, if you think about consumer need perspective, and we have done some work in obviously with Nielsen in the healthcare sector. There are certainly frustrations in a lot of markets, for example, where there is public healthcare, in terms of wait times and the accessibility and so on and so forth. So I think, and then in other markets there is the cost that is a big issue of accessing healthcare. So I think there is definitely a need and an opportunity for there to be this transaction and this relationship to be built with the tech companies, because they take away time, they take away costs. I mean, in some market in the Middle East, for example, there's a lot of notion of doctor shopping. So people tend not to be happy with the response they get. But at the same time, there's also this concern that if even the doctor's accent is a little off in speaking even their own language, people tend to not trust the doctor. So I think there are multiple facets that are involved in the healthcare industry. But I think overall, I believe that as the consumers are, kind of changing and shifting their a lot of things that they do in a daily life over to digital and mobile, I think certainly there's going to be a contagion effect in healthcare, where they would have that level of reliability to be able to move some of those transactions with the tech company. But I think one other thing that we need to also think about, where the regulation has been very slow in catching up to the technical development, and I think we are seeing some of that coming up in Europe. We saw, at least in privacy perspective. So as regulatory framework catches up, I think it also needs to be seen, how that would impact the adoption of technology in the healthcare sector.
Well, just to wrap up our webcast with our expert panels, maybe any parting thoughts on, as we look ahead, like what is one thing that you think companies should look out for in the next half year or year? Matt, let's start with you.
I would just say the think global, act local is still really important, and focus on, designing and curating great experiences.
John?
Yeah, I would say from a macroeconomic perspective, let's look at the next 2 quarters as they come up. I think we're okay for this year. Not sure about next year, and so some of these downward trends, will they continue, or will it bounce back up? That's what I'll be looking at.
Sumair?
I'll say 3 things. Sorry, I have 3. I think companies need to think about gaining a higher share of consumers' digital life. And by that, I mean not only getting more in front of them, but also stretching that relationship horizontally and vertically. I think there needs to be a process of always on measurement of experiences, because it's so volatile. There is so much happening there. I think there needs to be a better mechanism to capture that. And I think innovation needs to be not only faster, but also smarter. We are seeing a lot of companies, 77% of US businesses said that they're skipping at least 3 steps to innovation, and we are seeing that as a result in a lot of new products not doing well. So I think there's also going to be time soon where we're going to say, good enough is not going to be good enough.
Great. Well, thank you all, Matt, John, and Sumair, for joining us today and sharing your thoughts on the consumer world. Thanks to the audience, and also thanks to our team here that made the webcast happen. Let me just, to close, point out some of the resources, the studies that we covered here, the conference board study with Nielsen and PwC study, as well as some of our upcoming webcasts, our upcoming release of the next quarter of the Global Consumer Confidence Index, as well as other research reports that are coming up this summer. Thank you again, and we hope to see you on a future webcast.